Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of announcing the last panel before lunch. And not only is it the last panel before lunch, it is, I believe, maybe the only panel of the conference that is all women. We've decided it's called a Genel. So I hope that everybody will get inside from their coffee breaks and discussions of the previous panel to talk about philanthropy. With our philanthropy, Ukraine has reshaped a lot of the funding priorities that we see from philanthropy. At the same time, the democratic backsliding in the region and attacks on human rights, which we'll discuss also later, have continued unabated. Meanwhile, some of the largest donors in Europe are also reshaping a lot of their funding priorities. So how is philanthropy adapting, and what can we expect in the coming period? We have great speakers to discuss, so I would like to invite them to the stage. Julia van Dobeneck, who is the Senior Project Manager of Peace for the Western Balkans of the Robert Bosch Stiftung. Mia Vukojević, the Program Director for the Western Balkans of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Gordana Delić, the Regional Director for the Balkans and the Deputy Managing Director of the Transatlantic Trust of the German Marshall Fund. Vesna Bajšanski-Agić, who is the Executive Director of the Mozaik Foundation and a member of the board of Philea. And they will be moderated by Christal Morehouse, who is a Senior Program Officer for Open Society Europe and Central Asia Program. So please welcome them to the stage for maybe the inaugural Genel of the Belgrade Security Conference.
So where do we go? Like this?
No.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today in Belgrade and to have a chance to look at the world through the prism of philanthropy, civil society, think tanks. I think this is a time where the world is really struggling for definition. And so if we think about our emerging world order or disorder, however you want to see it, through the metaphor of a picture, there are some stark contours that we can already see. And those contours give quite reason for alarm. We've been through a pandemic. We are seeing a world that is in conflict. But every stress or tension has an opposite polar. And so what we want to do today in this panel is we want to walk a mile, so to speak, in the shoes of my colleagues in philanthropy to have a common understanding of what are some of the challenges that we're facing, and then move through toward the end to some of the opportunities and things we can do about it. So I'd like to begin just by asking, and I'll start with you, Julia, if you allow. What are the challenges that societies are facing from where you sit? What do you see?
Well, I think many of the challenges have already been touched upon here today already, and will be touched upon in the afternoon and also tomorrow. I mean, I think it's obvious we are facing huge global crisis. We are facing war again in Europe and massive militarization, of course. We are facing a climate change that is causing troubles all over the world, of course, and many more issues causing migration all over the globe. And we are, of course, also facing questioning the global order and questioning norms, not only on the global level and on the UN level, what has been discussed this morning, but also, I think, inside societies. I would even say that even in a country like Germany, I am not sure anymore whether we share the same values and respect the same norms, even if it still seems so. So we are also facing a huge polarization inside societies, of course. And I think these are the obvious challenges, and I think the overall challenge, maybe on a little bit of more of a meta level, probably is how do we live with constant crisis? How do decision makers still have the possibility to take wise decisions, because they have to take decisions like in minutes, in a minute order, and also how do societies deal with this constant feeling of insecurity and disbalance that all these topics coming at once cause. So I think it's also a question of how to make ourselves resilient, because I think the problems of today will not be away tomorrow. We will still have to deal with them, just as an overall picture.
Thanks very much. Mia, can I bring you in where you said, do you see similar challenges, or what would be your thoughts?
All of these and more. Can you hear me? Yeah. I would say all that Julia mentioned, and then probably many more, and this is just at what level you're looking at. If you look at more granular level, women's rights are under attack, rights in general under attack, civil societies, legitimacy and space. Legitimacy is being challenged, and space for its functioning is shrinking, and on and on and on. Ruptures are happening at every level and in every society and then globally. And it's just making for a world that sometimes you wonder whether there is a path to resolving these, to coming back to the norms and the ways of functioning, or will we need to go through a huge crisis of some kind that will put all of these together and that will then make us reassess everything and revalue everything. I'm sorry if I sound very depressed, but when you start talking about challenges this planet is facing, there is no end to it. You can keep going long and long.
Gordana, if I could bring you in, because your expertise is both regional and you work on a transatlantic portfolio, so what would be your thoughts?
Thank you, Christal, although I think this requires a global expertise, so to say. But no, change is painful. And I think our greatest challenge is that we are all at some kind of crossroads. We need a redefinition of literally everything, whether you call it values, whether what is really today the mainstream, what is not mainstream, what will be the mainstream tomorrow. And change requires compromise. And I think that the greatest challenge of today is that everyone is, how should I say, calculating how to make the least of a compromise possible, right? How to give in into any of the topics that have been covered here, how to give in the least. Well, as long as we are not ready to compromise, I think that this change will be painful. So that is what I think is actually making us all so vulnerable.
And Vesna, would you like to come in?
And then when we go at the community level, we are in fact losing citizens, we are losing people, because most of the decisions that they are making on daily basis are now based on fear. And when you make your decisions based on fear, then usually those are not the best decisions for yourself and for a community. From fear, you try to close and then to protect yourself, and then it's difficult to build a community, and without community, we cannot strive. And when people are fear, they are also losing hope, and then this is where we try to change something, and it's really difficult to change something when there is no hope and there is no vision what can be different. And we as a human beings are now also sounding depressive, but this is where we are, and from this we have to do and try to change something.
And maybe if I can just add one more thing that I think cuts across all the layers and all the crises. There is realization that the world, its populations are divided. We used to call them global north and global south, but really it's global majority and global minority. And global minority is the one with all the power. And power is concentrated in the north, but we are still mostly talking in the north. We're still mostly talking between those that have power, and philanthropy is part of that world. And we are still not talking enough with the other part or majority of the world, which is the people that don't have power, whether they are in our communities or whether they are on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, and thinking about all of these changes and the role of philanthropy, like with many governments, with many, even in families, everyone is sort of rethinking what is the way in which I can engage in this environment in a productive way? You know, who can I help? How can I make sure that things don't get worse? I think at some point, you know, we want to progress, and it's this turning point that we're trying to reach where we can figure out how to work together and come together. And philanthropies are kind of in a similar situation where there's a kind of internal churn, I think, at many philanthropies trying to figure out what is the right reaction, what is the right role. And Mia, maybe I could just start with you about your views on that. What role can philanthropy play in this changing world?
You're so right. Over the last 2, 3, 4 years, so many of my colleagues and so many foundations have gone through soul searching and strategy redefining and trying to figure out how to respond first to one crisis, then to next, then the third. We are all trying to figure it out. From where I sit, and this is, I think, both my personal opinion and my foundation's stance, is we need to go back to basics in understanding who we are and what we can do and can't do. We are just people that happen to have resources at our hands, and that's a privilege. That is not, that does not give you right, that does not give you power, that does not give you smarts, but it does give you something with which you can work. And so we see our role in finding the people that are having strategies, having ideas, trying to change things and supporting them, basically. And from where I sit, that's the most appropriate role for philanthropy, is not take the stance that this many billion and this many trillion and we are going to stop this and end that. We are not going to do any of that, right? We can find people that can do that and support them. And this is where I find hope.
Thanks very much. And I see, Julia, you want to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, and I just to add, and also to refer what you said before, we are still not talking to those, to the minorities or those in the south, as you said before. I think I'm pretty fresh to the world of philanthropy, but what I observed within Robert Bosch Foundation, there has been this strategy redefining, and I think what has come out of it is to really use the opportunity, which means that we can afford to take time to look at those who really need support. We can afford not having to take decisions all the time. We can afford not having to deliver results all the time, which others have to. If you look at state funding, for example, I mean, you do have to deliver results all the time, and that's a luxury, I would say, from what I can observe, that philanthropy has, and really like taking the time to develop or to co-create approaches together with partners, and that's mainly how the Robert Bosch Foundation is reacting to all these crises, to really start discussing approaches on eye-to-eye level, and take the time for co-creation, and not come and offer the pot and say, okay, you're doing this project, you're doing that, but letting things slowly develop, and I think that's a huge asset.
Gordana.
Thank you. I think the beauty of philanthropy is, in the first place, that it's 100% voluntary, right? So it's a voluntary decision of either a group of people or a person to support something for a higher goal. So it's also a noble thing to do. But since we have discussed the changing world, and your question was, what's the role really there for philanthropy? I think how I look at philanthropy is a venture capitalist, but only without generating profit. The profit here is generated in values, probably, later on. And it's something that can help actually redefine where we are going and what the 21st century is going to be about, and all of the centuries afterwards. To me, philanthropy is going to be one of the last resorts to basically defend at least some of the democratic values. It will be mostly up to those individuals or those groups who are going to be willing to invest in rethinking how we want to exist and coexist, whether global south, global north, global east, global west, whatever, in the future. I believe that philanthropy is going to be one of the crucial, tools or generators of ideas, because vision doesn't exist without ideas, and ideas do not exist without, people who are generating them. And philanthropy is probably going to have the key role in that.
And just to relate, in fact, on what so beside a power that we are aware, we have certain level of power sitting in private foundations, and then privilege that we have because we are on this point should not be misused. And I think that more and more foundations are aware of this, what Gordana was saying, that there is a crucial role that we can do with, to be honest, limited resources. Even if in number it sounds like only in Europe there is 60 billions given every year, still this is not enough to address, to mitigate, to fight against everything what is going on now. So what foundations, private foundations are doing now, having their private money given for a public causes, in fact, trying to see who are those really changers, what private foundations need to change, and how they can innovatively respond. For example, we were joking that, I don't know, if Martin Luther King needed support, will he be able to get this support from us as a private foundations? How we can identify who are Martin Luther Kings now, and how we can make sure that we will support them. How much we have to move for putting like equality between civil society and civil society organizations. So those are challenges that we are facing, and from this, I would say, comfortable role, like we have power and we have privilege, we are moving to the states, like there is a huge responsibility on this. And we have flexibility in giving those grants as a part of, this is what we do, we give grants, this is support that we are giving. And then finding this, the right match and the right partnership where this will have something, not profit, but something that we can measure, that it's not measured by money. And I think that this is a huge change that has happened in the sector of philanthropy, and that everyone is aware of this. When we speak to each other, it's not about how much money you gave, it's really about what are those individuals, organizations, stories that really moved something in societies where we work.
Thanks very much.
I'm going to talk too much probably, but Vesna just reminded me of a story. At one point, a couple of us philanthropists working in foundations have asked one of the biggest world's investor, the guy that has made fortune on stock exchange and investing in things. We've asked him for advice, and he says one of the biggest challenges you face in philanthropy is that you are risk averse. And we are. We kind of want Martin Luther King to guarantee to us that his idea is going to work, right? Which is wrong. So I think we need to learn how to take more risks, how to be less risk averse, and expect that every idea we support and every organization we give funding to will give us results, that something will come out of it. We have to relax more and be more generous with taking risks on people in order to
fight this. Yeah.
To fight this, what we are in.
Julia, please come in.
I would actually say on the contrary, because I've worked for the public sector before and for NGOs before, and always being under this pressure, and I observed rather the other sector as the one being risk averse, and the philanthropic sector as the one like really. Absolutely, and that's what I'm telling, right? So compared to where other pots of funds are sitting, I think it's quite the opposite. Still, I mean, to identify the Martin Luther Kings, that's a huge challenge. I fully agree, but can't we also afford being these like learning organizations and not having to only invest into the Martin Luther Kings? I think we can.
We're not enough.
Okay.
Partly we're not enough because the pot is still small.
Yeah.
So yes, 60 billion may sound like a lot of money. In the United States, every year 500 billion is spent. But 1/3 of that goes to faith-based organizations. 1/3 probably to services. So it's not that much money. And then we, and I think of all of us here as foundations and philanthropies that work on progressive side, we are fighting a wave, global wave that's going in an opposite direction. And so there is a lot that's working against it. Sometimes I think it's good enough if the organizations we support hold the line. Sometimes it feels to me that if organizations in Serbia survive and stay there and keep working is a success. That's how I look at it.
Yeah,
And Mia, just point on this 1/3 that it's through philanthropy and social causes, it's divided among those values. Part of them, it's us, and part of them, and bigger part, it's them. It's people with different values. And they get support, and they are in this pot, and for example, they are fighting abortion. And all of this is in the same pot. And
they don't look for Martin Luther Kings. They give to anyone that says that they are anti-abortion.
yeah,
They just throw out the money and bet that some of it will work.
and they have fear that it's much more motivating emotion in decision making because you are afraid of something and of God or something else, and when you are afraid, then you react. But usually this what you react, it's dangerous. So I just want to, that even if this pot sounds good, the portion that in fact supports democracy, and this is what we are discussing here, security and democracy, it is small. However, to go to this what Julia said, it's so flexible. This is private money that person or family or company made, and they can go down the river and throw it away. And they decide not to do it, but to give it for a public cause. What it gives us enormous flexibility. So if we have a little money, but huge flexibility, it's not only Martin Luther King, but we have to do business that it's not business as usual, because those challenges are not challenges as usual. And then we have to start something, and maybe we have the biggest power, privilege, and responsibility to identify those who are the real change makers, and then make sure that later other pots will support it. But at the beginning, probably our flexible money makes it possible, makes a difference, hopefully.
And just picking up on what you said, do you see a kind of polarization within philanthropy, right? There's just not one philanthropy with one set of values. So I know, Julia, you wanted to come in. Maybe you can come in and then pick up on that point.
No, first that question, and I can pick up the other one afterwards. And that's over to one of you, because I can't really answer to that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if society is polarized, civil society will be polarized just as well. Philanthropy is part of the civil society, and it's perfectly normal. I think it's actually even desirable. I don't want to sit here with everyone who just nods and agrees with me. I think it's good that we disagree, right? And so, when you, Vesna, said it's us and them, I was like, oh, I don't quite like, this division. And I don't know really who is them and who is me and who is us, etc. So in my opinion, our role must be embracing these differences and talking about them. I'm perfectly fine also with people who are fighting for or against values that I don't maybe cherish, right? Simply because maybe I learned something from them. So you mentioned one topic, right? But the polarization or the differentiation among the philanthropical part of the society is perfectly normal. Elon Musk, he's a philanthropist, isn't he? What do you think of him?
Would you like to come in on this point?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Gordana, obviously. Polarization exists in a society, so it's not going to get not to happen within the world of philanthropy. And I don't know that it's necessarily bad. It's just, it is. It's a reflection. It sometimes bothers me when the philanthropy starts following rather than being polarized, it starts following trends. When, say, after Ukraine war, many of the government and bilateral funders suddenly decided this is the most important story in the world, so suddenly their funding starts getting pulled from other parts of the world and other crises and gets moved there, or for COVID, or for whichever, pick your crisis. I feel like we shouldn't follow. Now I mean private philanthropy, rather than the government funders, we, although being tiny in comparison to the amounts of funding that the governments have and that they can yield, our flexibility and our ability to stay steady, I think presents us with the responsibility to stick out, to stay, to be, not to follow the fads and trends and...
Yeah, and
The
Julia,
ideas
you wanted to come in on several points now, please.
Yeah, maybe I can combine both. I hope so. I would also say that this is one of the biggest challenges from what I observe for philanthropy, to maybe to keep track of decisions once taken and not to be meddled into what all the new headlines are saying and where the public opinion is moving to every day to the next, and at the same time, of course, not losing sight either. But really, this keeping track and sticking with the decisions once taken, where to support actors or organizations. And I'm also asking myself whether the entire field would sometimes be better off not to that much focus on what I would call it the political field is doing, like, or the political decision makers is doing, or where the public funds are going to, not even in a sense of that we identify the Martin Luther Kings, coming back to that metaphor, and then someone else is taking over, supporting them, but and I tell you why, because I think there's a risk of this in this thinking. From what I am observing, the public funding in all the sectors that we are working will probably be cut during the next years. It's already, but it will be cut even more, right? So the question is, is it wise to rely on such a thinking, or wouldn't it be wiser to think even more outside the box? Like, where can we invest so that it's really sustainable?
Yeah. Mia, did you want to come in on this before we move to the next?
argue with Julia,
Yeah,
but I think
go ahead.
Yeah, I saw you were like a spark in your eye. Moving on. Okay. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, of our era right now is this tension between democracy and autocracy. And when we think about preparing for societies and in the future, we really don't know what kind of context those societies are going to be living in, not just in the terms of governance, which I think, in my view, is the biggest challenge, right? If you could solve the challenge of good governance, so many of the other challenges would at least diminish in their size. The environmental protections, rights for women, right? You know, if you could solve the good governance question, you would be in a much better position to solve the rest. But at the moment, we're kind of heading toward the ratcheting up of bad governance, if you will, right? You were speaking about this earlier, Gordana, just about what is the least amount I need to compromise, you know, this sort of nationalism or selfism, whatever that unity of self is, if it's a state or an individual. And so one of philanthropy's challenges is really to think about how do we engage around democracy? You know, where does it stand in our priorities, but how do we even perceive of support for democracy? Because a lot of times support for democracy for populations, for people and populations, feels like soliciting a vote at a specific time. Democracy can really be boiled down almost to a transaction. It can lose its meaning. And at the other end of the spectrum, we can measure democracy on the values that are held, and also on the rights of the people who have the least power in society, right? So there's this big spectrum of how we can view democracy, and what I'd like to ask our panelists is, how can philanthropy engage in strengthening and supporting democracy? And if you allow, Gordana, I would start with you.
Oh, well, like $1 million question, really. Well, first of all, I think philanthropy will be challenged also by the autocratic tendencies as well, because it will be seen in many different ways almost as the enemy of a state in many different instances. I believe that that will be one of the challenges that philanthropists already are facing in certain areas or in certain geographies, and these geographies might actually grow across the globe. Where it plays the role, I think, in providing programs or in financing programs that will provide alternative education, alternative information sharing, alternative leadership development, rather than to what is the mainstream. I don't see any other, the big word for a couple of years has been innovation. But I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel every single time we're trying to do something. So I don't really see what philanthropy could do else in the coming years when democracy is contested, other than invest in youth and younger generations that are to come, and in leadership development. And also, I think, in career development, if you want, because that, unless people are self-sustainable, meaning that they can live their lives, I don't think they can engage in being active citizens. So that would be not innovative answer.
Thanks very much. Philea, can I bring you into the conversation? You would like to?
I would pass it. Yeah.
Julia is a peace builder.
So I think that it's important that private philanthropy believes in democracy, and private philanthropy is there, and private philanthropy is doing for different things. And there are cases now around the world. It's not about being innovative for the sake of being innovative, but obviously ways that we were using and doing are not effective enough. We are losing the game. So there are globally really interesting, they are often called like reimagining. So it's really about reinventing and reimagining and forgetting some KPIs and indicators that were measured before, and trying really to find the right people and then giving them really flexible pot of money, trying to see what can be done. And there are a few of them now connecting a global north. I was really happy. For me, that was like first time in my life that I have people from global north sitting as equal contributors around the table, and this is now happening more and more. And I think that this is where private philanthropy shows this reimagination. I like it more than innovation. Like, let's reimagine how this can be done. There is something that was done by several private foundations, like General Support Grant. Now there are more and more foundations giving General Support Grant with the same thing in the mind, but this is like immediate something that you can do. There is second point, what I think that works well is we need shortcuts. We are losing and we are late. So shortcuts would be not only giving our money for organizations and people that will do something, but it's also giving up power that we have because we decide where money is. And now there are more and more foundations who really practice participatory grant making. 10 years ago, that was like, are you sure that you want your beneficiaries to decide where money will go? But now we have really good practices where in fact we are giving up this power that comes with money and really sharing this power and then empowering people who are in fact there, empowering them to be citizens. And I think that this is a shortcut and something that it's not only that we are supporting democracy, we are practicing democracy in everything what we do. And I think that this is also changing a game a bit. And then finally, and I really like it, I heard it, I don't know where I heard it, but then in this really polarized world, and then foundations deciding that, you know, we are here fighting the others. And then in this fighting, in fact, we are contributing to the conflict because we are fighting others. And this rhetoric also needs somehow to change. And I heard, I don't know even, that there is like, if you have all the people on one spot and then you have as a Gauss line, is it Gauss line? So 20% of people are always good. And among those 20% of people that are good, you have 5% who are this crazy good, who will die for another human being. And 20% of people are always bad. And among them, you have 5% that was referring to the war. So I would say like war criminals, you know, after surviving war in Bosnia. So you have 5% that are war criminals, you don't even speak with them. But then there is 60% of people that can be good or bad, depending on the context. And I think that this 60% of people is in fact our power. And if we are supporting those 20%, one of the main things what we have to do is in fact to empower them not to lose these 60% people who are in the middle. It can be good or bad, depending on the context. And I think that this is also something that private philanthropy with its flexibility is doing. So it's not only about finding different arguments and fighting others, but it's really speaking with the 60% of people who will be good if we provide them context that they will lean towards good. And I think somehow those practice. Gordana will have a.
No, Gordana will have.
But I think that this is somehow where at least European philanthropy. Okay, Mia, you are there in Philea, but this is in fact how we are trying to discuss and find some shortcuts in this, you know, doing business that it's not business as usual.
Mia, please come in.
Very practical. For me, this is about continuing to support civil society, and if possible, in the most flexible ways.
Yeah.
So long-term core support, because it's civil society that is defending democracy, and especially organizations that explicitly work on defending democracy. And as funders, going around talking to other funders who are now shifting for democracy to climate, or from democracy to this, for democracy to that, to try and influence other funders. And finally, in terms of actions and ideas that people are trying and testing, I think the initiatives where people are engaging people massively in democratic practice. So, for example, organizations that are managing to mobilize massively around climate change, or around rivers, or against a mine, which you wouldn't think is about democracy, but it's actually all about democracy. If you, as a small organization, manage to mobilize 100,000 people, 200,000 people, 5,000 people who get engaged to go and protest and stop traffic, or start a court case, or that is a true democracy. And that, in my mind, may make people believe again that there is value for them and for their community in democracy, because that is being lost in the challenge to democracy at this point.
One of the key practices in democracy, of course, is majorities, right? And this is a bit of a tricky thing, right? Because if majorities have to be persuaded, usually you don't just have a majority opinion distilled out and everyone agrees, right? So, and in today's world, it seems like one of the big opportunities, but also kind of challenges to democracy is the power of persuasion. So we've seen very sophisticated methods being used to persuade, people, especially around elections, but just around issues, to side with one ideology, I would say, but usually those ideologies are associated also with political parties or groups of political parties. And so we get this kind of tug of war almost with opinions in society these days. And I think when I think about climate activists, for example, right, there is not one kind of flavor of climate activists. There's a whole spectrum of the way civil society engages around climate. And I think it's quite interesting to see what also societal reactions are sometimes to these different actions. And I'm just wondering, within your philanthropies, how are you thinking in terms of supporting causes and issues, but also in a way that is persuadable for society to then also want the things that the activists are putting their energy into? If anyone has thoughts on that.
I have a very short one. I think this is where we take risks because we don't know what will work, what won't. We should just trust our grantees and people that are trying and testing to see, and then they'll learn as they go and get better and better at it.
Most of the time, yes.
Did you want to expand on that, Gordana?
Well, now I was just thinking about something slightly different, but yet along the lines, the power of persuasion, you said, and so on. But somewhere along the line of this power of persuasion, I think we have also lost the meaning of democracy and what it actually is, and it's not just that when majority wins the election, right? There are correctives. Democracy understands that yes, it can be the power of majority, but it can't be called democracy only if it has correctives as well that will ensure that those who didn't win election will also be represented. That's not there. And what bothers me is that is slowly getting lost in almost everything, not just parliaments, not just governments, but even in debates, right? So it somehow goes back to you're either with us or against us, and I just don't see that that can be that is sustainable. However, the non-sustainability of that kind of approach will be seen, will mirror itself in rather ugly pictures around the globe. And that is my worry. And I think that, when we risk what Mia said, we also have to be democratic, and accept that we sometimes might not like the outcome of what we support, and that's also fine, and that is the risk, right? And I think that's the learning curve. But we no longer, I don't see much of a learning curve happening around, and I miss that.
Yeah, Julia, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, just a thought that goes to a similar direction, because I'm originally coming from the peace building field, and I mean what we are trying to do there is to find compromises and to find consensus, and so for me, investing in democracy means a lot more than bringing people to elections. And oftentimes what I'm observing is this like total election focus, and as many as people please go to the polls, and even some programs focusing on that, like going from door to door and talking to the people and making them come to the election, and then you get the result of the election, which is totally not what you wanted, actually. It's the opposite. And so what I think where we should invest, like as societies, where we should invest a lot more is understanding how to find compromises, understanding how to find consensus, and really to fight for things, to argue, to discuss, but on a verbal level, but also to accept that there are other interests and other opinions and other needs.
Yeah,
And to relate to this, for us, it was one of the aha moment, and it happened when we realized that, in fact, when you want to change something, you can do it like revolutionary and evolutionary. So you can go out, you can have protest, you can be a watchdog, you can change it, and this is needed. This is what we are referring that, even if majority wins, you are sure that a minority is represented, so fight for this. And there is another thing that is more like evolutionary, and this is even in this broken world, let's see what works, and then let's try to build on this. And for us, this type of approach helped us once when you put in because it's difficult to be both. You cannot be revolutionary and evolutionary in one person or one organization, because usually you are speaking with the same people on another side of the table. For us, this helped. So there is approach when something is really broken, then go and protest. For Bosnia, that was really difficult to go and protest, because we are then re-stimulating what was happening in 90s. But then we have this also different approach where let's see what works, and then let's start to change it. I'm not saying about infiltrating in political parties and change them with inside, whatever, because it doesn't work. But let's try something that works and then build on this by bringing more democratic principles and trying to build something that then will empower people and change the way how they see. Because living in such a corrupted, and it's not only, okay, we can relate to the region. You just don't think that things can be different. UNFPA made a research, and I think that they said that average Bosnian, it's 33 years old, has elementary school. So this is citizens that we are discussing, this what we want to achieve. So we have to find a way how to make them democratic citizens who participate and think about public good. And it's difficult. From our chairs, it's difficult. So we have to think about different ways to bring our citizens on.
Yeah, I think there's one challenge at the societal level, and in philanthropy can invest also in society and education. But I think there's also a challenge for democracy and the system of how it works in itself, because there's kind of a ticking clock as to how quickly democracy has to deliver before citizens will become fed up with democracy and start to wonder if a strong leader might be a better solution. And so I think that there's a real challenge for democracy in terms of compromise, in terms of finding outcomes. And I don't think that democracies have faced that kind of a pressure in recent history before, to say, look, if you don't deliver, your time is limited. And I think that this is something that we're starting to face more and more, that there's an impatience with the outcomes of governance. I'm looking at the clock, and this is the point in time where we get to take questions from our audience for Q&A. So anyone who would like to come in at this time, please raise your hand, and you will be handed a mic from the tech team. What's this gentleman here? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Eric Nelson. I was the U.S. Ambassador in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I'm now the Associate Director at the Marshall Center in Bavaria. I want to thank the panel for a great discussion, and the last panel heard a challenge from the audience of where's the sense of urgency. I think that you all are working in a very important space in this region. My own observation that the people of this region have tremendous competitive advantage in adaptability and resiliency from surviving centuries of adversity. And the EU benefits from that now largely when people leave. And they are achieving their potential in diaspora. The EU could benefit more if that adaptability and resilience were fully activated here locally. And you all are making important investments in that. And the Vesna mentioned that I'm surprised I'm at a conference about the Balkans and we haven't talked much about brain drain yet. But the challenge is, and the urgency is, that those citizens who feel they have agency to make a difference are leaving. Whether they can make a difference through their vote or a difference by engaging their community or finding a venture and a job. And the work that you're doing at that grassroots level is invaluable. So I want to return to Mia's point about venture capital. If philanthropists, is that yours?
No.
It's Gordana's point.
Oh, Gordana, you talked about, you talked about philanthropists are venture capitalists, and the success of a venture capitalist is when there's a public offering, when the market comes in and invests heavily in that great idea and that great group or individual. So I'm wondering what, and I'm looking at the room too, which is sadly sparsely populated compared to the last panel where people were expecting political giants to bring the solutions instead of individual citizens. So in that marketplace, I'm wondering what could be done to improve the handoff from your support to the EU or to the market, to investors, to others who are ready to come, or to even creating political will in a country where the country is ready to change the laws, to open more space. What's missing in scaling up the individual ventures that you're supporting and those great ones that deserve to flourish? Is there a gap there that could be resolved to create some progress and counter the pessimism and negativity that dominates discussions about the future of this region? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll take a second question and then bring in the panel, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandra Matas. I'm the Director of International Security Dialogue Department at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. I was here on the second session today talking about European political community. I think I will not have a question, but more a suggestion and an idea and a comment, and that relates to some of the issues you raised during the panel, and also that relates to your question right now. So you started by saying that you're also lacking the ideas now, basically how to support in this polarized world, in this very difficult environment, what can be done. I think the same questions are asked by our governments on the political level. They are lacking ideas. What needs to be done? I'm here in Belgrade for the second day, and I heard the word need for dialogue about 15 times at least. We need dialogue, we need dialogue, we need dialogue. Why we need dialogue? Because it's blocked. On track one level, nothing is happening. Politicians don't want to talk to each other. Very often in this part of Europe, in another part of Europe, in another part of the world, we see there's a clear trend now to live in the echo chambers and not to discuss with each other. What can be suggested in this situation is to have those informal, confidential spaces for dialogue without track one, politicians, officials being involved, but with experts. Again, I'm not talking here about academic discussions in universities, research papers. No, those are the experts that are directly linked with decision makers, policy makers in their countries that could get together with non-like-minded, with the people they shouldn't be seen with, probably together, but think together and come up with ideas that could afterwards be channeled to decision makers. So we in our center, from the name of my department, you probably understand, do those dialogues. And I should tell you that they're very much appreciated in different countries. When we talk to different states, they say, oh, that's very interesting, but we can't be associated to this. But please come and tell us what you discussed there, because we really need this. And right now there is no political will, again, to use those ideas, but they need to be there on the table. It takes time also to generate them. So when political will and the moment is right, why don't we come and use them? So that's one of my suggestions. We work with a number of private foundations for whom it's a new sphere of philanthropy. A lot of them work in health issues, but they find it really interesting and something that helps to address the current world blockade and polarization. So one of the ideas for you, and I'll be happy to discuss it.
Thanks very much. Mia, I see you want to speak.
I just wanted to say we do that in this region. I would say it's useful, but with the positions as entrenched as they are, it's not actually moving the needle. And we have a number of processes that we are funding that are track two processes, or 1.5 track 1.5.
Thank you.
Vesna, you wanted?
Yeah.
Can I just say a small thing about that? You have no idea how much thinking is going into this, and we are not finding answers because young people, nobody wants to tell these young people don't leave. I'm one of the people that left, so I have no credibility in telling anyone not to leave. We do have conversation with them. I've been a part of an initiative where in the United States we've tried to gather beautiful, brilliant people from this region that are now teaching in all of the universities in the United States. They all want to do something for their countries. Most of them are not considering going back, but they are all willing to do something. They don't want to be associated with politics, either from here or in DC. They don't even want to go to meetings in DC, although they would be great advisors to American government. And it's really hard. The one idea that they recently came up with was they would all be willing to come teach here, spend time here, share their skills, come be 6 months, be 12 months, and then leave. And I think maybe that would be a potential pathway to maybe then bringing some of them back. But honestly, that's a question, million-dollar question that none of us have answers to.
And in relation to this, and thank you, Ambassador, for the question, because we didn't even mention this, that every time when we are giving money, we are also thinking about how to strengthen infrastructure for giving, infrastructure for philanthropy, so that every euro that we give somewhere, it's matched by other euro. And then it has significant impact on democracy, because people feel invited to join, invited to participate, empowered because they did something for their own community. And now with this huge and enormous people going out, usually they don't want to give back immediately. And when I say give back, I don't think only about money, but second generation, and then later on, they want to give back different things here. And we think that it's important, this is important link that we should be building on. And then what we have to do, they are not giving, they said because of two reasons. A, they are not asked. And B, it's not easy to give. They don't trust. So right now, in building this infrastructure for philanthropy in the region, we are trying to work on advocacy action to change the laws. We are trying to make it easy, that it's simple and easy. If I'm in Canada, or even if I want to come to teach in Bosnia, what does it mean? To whom should I go? What is easy infrastructure for me to give back? And we cannot, I mean, we dream about this, that we will create better opportunities. For those who wants to live, that's perfectly fine. But those who wants to stay, that we can create opportunities for them to stay. And in fact, I think that every single one of us is trying to do, sorry, this is stiff and I'm not moving my head. But I think that this building infrastructure for philanthropy that should result that every citizen is a philanthropist and can contribute something, it is important part of the work that we are doing, because this is also part of democracy. This is how you participate.
Thanks so much. We have 2 minutes left. So I see there's one more question. Okay, we'll take a final question. There are two.
Thank you. I'm from the periphery, very glad to be the final question. Julia Ivan from Amnesty International of the Netherlands. And I really appreciated your comments, Mia, on sustainability and how it's an investment to work as a philanthropist. And my question is maybe the elephant in the room, is that we hear a lot from our local partners in Serbia that sustainability is a real challenge, and core funding and the lack of core funding is a key problem that is sometimes insurmountable, and NGOs need to close down because they just simply don't have the funds to do so. True with EU funding, project and grant-based dependency on these funding, that's a very important struggle now. And my question would be if you feel an urgency around that, and if your organizations are promoting it with your discussions with other partners, if it could be like a movement of philanthropists to be more risk-taking and invest more in sustainability, fundraising, comms, etc. You know the game. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we just take the final question here, and then we'll go.
Thank you. Biljana Dakić of Partners Global, formerly of Track Foundation, one of the local grant makers. Before I make a question, I just wanted to refer to something that distinguished ambassador mentioned, and this is the participation of citizens. What Vesna just mentioned, the importance of the building of philanthropic infrastructure, I cannot stress it enough, speaking from practice, because what we are seeing across the region is increased participation of citizens in giving for public cause, which actually, in a way, by providing support to various local initiatives, they're actually, how to say, regaining their own participation in public processes. What I wanted to ask the distinguished panel, and being very happy about the gender structure of this panel, like some others, is the fact that was mentioned on the previous panel and also 2 times with the participants, and that is the political will and the common approach. There was a mention at the previous panel that we need more political will and more common approach to bring the region closer to the EU. So my question is, to what extent the philanthropists in Europe and in the States, as a kind of transatlantic philanthropic community, use their clout, the resources they have, and the ears of the decision makers that they have the access to actually accelerate the movement of the region towards democratic processes and to the EU. And also, to what extent do they take a common approach in doing this? Because we talk a lot about the donor coordination, but is there an opportunity to do it even more specifically between the private and the public donors? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mia, it seems like the questions were directed to you. I'll give you a chance first to answer.
I'll try and be short and quick. Thank you for that question. I don't think it can be overstated what's happening right now in Serbia, and I think this is coming to other countries in the region. The organizations are, I would say, 50% that I know are in crisis, financial crisis, and the political crisis is coming after them as well. So they're being targeted and so on. From what I know, in addition to us, there is maybe one other funder that gives general support. And then there are 2 or 3 others that give very flexible grants, not general support. That is nothing. Yeah. That is ridiculous. And we do lots of advocacy around it, and we are trying to influence others, but it's really, really difficult. And then the final point on that is, we recently had a meeting of the Balkans funders, and we just did a straw poll in the room, and what we realized was that there is, amongst all of us that were sitting in the room, maybe $20 million going into the region every year. That is nothing. That is nothing compared to the needs, compared to other funding that's coming. So if all of that money was general support, if all of the money coming from the philanthropy and private foundations, that would make a huge difference. And Biljana's questions, yes and no, we all try. They don't normally listen to us. I'm pretty sure that all of us are engaged and meet our colleagues in the ministries for development and state departments, and most of the times we ignored. That's my impression.
Well, I see the clock flashing at us in red. We're 3 minutes over. So on that positive note, I'm going to close the panel. I invite everyone who would still like to have a conversation to approach us. And thank you very much, and have a nice lunch.
Thank you. Thank you.